Hello, I'm Jane Green MBE, and I'm talking about bodies, brains, and burnout. And it's a personal story as well as the wider connections. I have no other disclosures than I'm a chair of SEDSConnective. What happens when the world doesn't see you? It says you're invisible, you don't matter, what you're experiencing is not real, you don't exist, and your values are worthless. There's a real disconnect between the body and brain, and you're living without recognition or language for your experience, and this can create emotional and physical toll, uh, and uncertainty and chaos. And if you are neurodivergent, like I am, that's something we don't like particularly. So we get more of it. And worse, sometimes you're told you're too sensitive, or perhaps you don't like something, so you're making it up, or you're just neurotic or a hypochondriac. So what do? You've got this fight or flight response. Um, and so your body might be talking to you, but is your brain listening? And then, of course, this can carry on. It creates trauma. And for your children, it's repeated and repeated, and maybe your family and friends generationally. This is my story and why it matters, but hopefully has some impact for other people, and why being unseen and not believed impacts on both physical and mental well-being. Neurodivergence is about the way the brain thinks, behaves, learns, and processes differently from the neuromajority, or the general population, or you can say neurotypical. I'm not too fussy what you say there. Uh, some language does matter, but not there. And Asusumasu stated in the late 1990s that neurodivergent was different from neurotypical. And neurodivergence, you can see in the slide there with the different brains based on data, um, uh, for hypermobility, I mean, is used to describe the existence of these differences, particularly when discussing the overall concept or the various ways a brain functions differently. Now, that was in the 1990s, so we've moved on a little bit there. Now, obviously the nuance with the physical health wasn't there because we didn't know about it. You can't be angry about it because we didn't know about it. Although you would think maybe we had, when we think about Hippocrates first mentioning uh, the joints and the laxity and the poor wound healing 400 BC. Hypermobility was first described in 1967 by Kirkendall. But of course, we used to know it for decades, like joint being double jointed. That's all I remember. And doing party tricks, of course. And then I always knew I was different, by the way, quite a young age, but there was no language. So with autism, most of the studies are done with autism, and it's not an explanation for everything. I don't believe there's one explanation for neurodivergence, and it's not autism. But there is a lot put down to that. So often, if an autistic person reports a symptom like pain to a clinician, they might assume it's because you're autistic. So, for example, if you said, "I've got pain," well, we can't find it any positive results. So maybe it's sensory overload, stroke, neurotic. You're dizzy. I feel really dizzy. Well, maybe you've got anxiety, emotional stress. I've got stomachache. Well, you might have anxiety. You're a fussy eater, ARFID, or maybe an eating disorder. I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but we need to look wider. I'm really, really tired. I can't get up. I can't move. Well, you've got autistic burnout, and it might be the environment, society, and you can't cope with it, uh, or it doesn't fit you. And then you've got brain fog. You're dizzy. Well, obviously the school or workplace doesn't fit you. Full stop. Where is the why? Where is the curiosity on this? Also, executive functioning. Well, you've got ADHD. Full stop. Period. Yeah, but why? this was me. I've got decades and decades of personal experience, 33 years as a parent carer and 27 years professionally. Um, I'm not working now. I think the brain is really key because it goes down to the body. There are arrows there, and we need to join it up. One of the studies, is the green one, Serdalov, looked at autism. So, if given Ehlers-Danlos in 2016, this was, you were 74% more likely to be autistic and 56% ADHD. But interestingly, it looked at siblings and it found a link there, like twins, and also 3 times more likely to have depression or bipolar. And then this other study in 2022, I think, by our patron and teams and Dr. Kazek's showed that neurodivergent people are more than double likely to have hypermobility joints and experience pain on a regular basis more than the general population, but also dizziness and pain. Now, this you can find them there in the links. But this last one was quite interesting for me on childhood allergy, because for the first time, what I've seen is looking at children aged 3 and 9, autism and ADHD, and the link to IgE direct food allergy, which I'm sure is there from my personal experience and the committees I've sat on, but it wasn't there for the non-IgE, so non-direct allergy. So that's something I'd like to look at because that's a little bit surprising. But I find that quite interesting. And I've picked these three. There are loads of really, really good studies out there, just for brevity, but also interesting how they're evolving. I shouldn't be here today, but I am. I learned to mask pain from an early age. I moved to schools a lot, so it's always a new environment, which I have to assimilate before I can understand how it works. But probably 7 schools before the age of 10. And when I came back to England, I had to sit a very big exam called the 11 plus. And I remember sitting there just doodling because I had no idea what to do. And I didn't like that at all. And that from that you had 4 ability sets in school, and I was put in the bottom one, apart from 2 lessons, which I did well in, of course. But it was a matter of survival. I've had a lot of survival strategies during my life, and this was one where I had to be situationally mute for a few years because if you had an answer, I would have been squashed by my peers. It was chaotic. There was no structure. And obviously, there was no understanding of autism really back then, particularly for girls, of course. But most because I was called a hypochondriac. I was often ill. But when I wasn't, I was missing in school because it didn't meet my needs. And it was easier to do that as well. Burnout is it's a state of exhaustion caused by long-term stress and pressure, and it really affects the physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion. It completely overrides you, and it's not just for neurodivergent people, of course. Everyone can have this. But for me, it was the interplay of the physical and mental, masking health because you've got a job, you've got to keep your job. I was trying to save my family, which I'll show you in the next slide, having some money, but it just builds up. And this chronic exhaustion did not get better after a night's sleep, even though a whole weekend at times I was just completely exhausted and in pain. And that reduces functioning as well. So you get the sensory overload. You might get sometimes a loss of skills. It was like self-care. You can't make a start for something. It's called inertia. And you can also get shutdowns and meltdowns. So, for me, the body might have been speaking a lot, a cacophony of sounds and signals by then, but I don't think my brain was listening. So I came back to England and I married, had children, And my eldest was born, had a very long labor and pregnancy. And I think the problems we have with hypermobility were quite extreme, either very early or very late. And not knowing about this, the connective tissues, has a huge impact for us. So they were very ill and they couldn't feed. I got a lot of comments that I was failing my child because they had all these issues and weren't meeting developmental milestones. But in fact, managed to get my eldest diagnosed autistic ADHD, dyspraxic, and a learning disability before the age of 3. So I decided to study psychology just before the age of 40. I was told it was silly, and why not remarry and become a housewife? I did the statement of special needs and I ended up as a teaching assistant because I ended up being in school anyway all the time for my eldest. And I seemed to have a collection of children around me. I found them really lovely and easy to work with. But there's a reason for that, obviously. And the teachers had no idea what to do and they'd ask me. So I studied psychology. I did well. It absolutely cemented what I thought I knew, that I was autistic. But of course, I couldn't be because there was no wording for it for a woman, middle-aged woman like me. And I didn't have blue hair then. Um, I had to fight for my eldest child that they had to go to a special secondary or high school. But it was very hard. I had no support. So I had to work out how to challenge the system and how to provide evidence for it when I had it's very difficult for me to do that. I didn't know what I was doing. There was never been a set path for me to follow. Um, but they did do that, and then they went to a very good college, but had to leave at 19 and with no support, and came back home. So I tried to find courses they could train in, and they wanted to do that because otherwise, like a lot of young people, they become isolated in their room gaming, computing. But luckily, because in a way I'd been so ill and working, they had to do structured jobs during the day. And it was about building the confidence, which I can talk about other times. I had to turn down a lot of opportunities and illness due to illness, which I would have liked. So I had to change my career. But I studied more degrees. I did a child development postgrad. I did my master's and I became a national lead and assistant head teacher. So I was doing very well very quickly. And I did do well. I forgot to tell people. So I was often made redundant too. But I have learnt to tell people what I do. There was no social media in those days, so no one knew me. But all these illnesses and operations I had, I was told you should have recovered by now. You should be back at work. I didn't know. I'm quite little. I thought, well, I should be. I'm not, but I'll just pretend I am. I had to retire from my well-earned hard career in 2015 early. I was so ill and burnt out. I got my diagnosis, but the discharged, and I was on a lot of medication, and things got worse. I couldn't eat for 3 months. I wanted to eat, but the vomiting, the reflux, and the pain just didn't allow it. I didn't, and the coughing, I couldn't breathe. I got a fear of food. As a middle-aged woman, I got a fear of food. Luckily, a teaching hospital helped me, and a doctor then did believe me. So I got referred, and I spent 2 years though recovering. I was absolutely exhausted. I had that cement in my body. I couldn't even lift my eyelids at times. My children became my carers, which is harsh. And I mean it. I was in a wheelchair. I had splints, plastic splints on my legs. I wore the same boots for 10 years. I had so many crutches and walking sticks. But when I couldn't breathe, I was so ill. I couldn't even get on, let alone the stairs. I could never crawl up, but I couldn't get on our sofa bed. And my children asked if I was dying, and I didn't know what to say because I didn't know what's happening. All these things were affecting us. And I thought, I have to know what's happening. And, these drugs really did help me. I was in so much pain, but also I couldn't get to the end of a sentence without brain fog, and I had to look after my eldest. So I decided I did everything I could to try and understand what was happening. I had made some links with researchers and I was looking at everything. I was looking for something out there that didn't exist that connected it with all the patterns I'd seen with children, but no curiosity. And luckily, there was curiosity here. And I did some studies. Dr. Eccles, our patron now, and the other team members, by the way, and so we have presented together on education, health, and neuroscience, which is good because I think the silos should be connected. And of course, I've been honoured with an MBE, which for the first time for neurodivergence, hypermobility, and Ehlers-Danlos syndromes. My children are there on the other side of that picture. My cat was always there for me when I was injured or ill. No longer with us, but he definitely was part of SEDS and in papers. So this is my key part is education is really important. I think we have to have it from conception. Education matters, but even pregnancy and birth and beyond because of our different physical health. Early years are really critical. So the earlier you put in interventions or supports, even without a diagnosis, because most children won't get a diagnosis before the age of 5, and there's a very rare type of EDS. Now they might for neurodivergence, but is it connected? No. Um, and so we don't want the children to have that stigma that I've had and others have had all this time. They do need supports and adjustments, and I talk about this in the papers. I did with pain advisors the first paper on this. It's a topical review, and although language changes, it's still relevant, and hopefully more coming. So I want to talk about what's missing here, both in education and health, is relational safety. And that can't exist without the physical health as well. But to understand that, we need to do a lot more. Relationships are built on trust, and but must acknowledge and respond to the realities we have. And otherwise, we get that burnout. So if you're masking the pain and the physical health, it could be trauma. It stores trauma. I call it inflammation, basically. And I'm not anxious. I don't have anxiety, but I also have alexithymia. So in a way, that's a good thing and a bad thing. But I do know when I'm flat. And I do know when I feel I've been invalidated for my feelings. So in short, we need to connect the body and mind there. And the relational safety framework, or concept, is used really in education and social care and it's what's needed for security, trust, and emotional support. But delays in that can lead to unmet needs and misinterpretation of behaviors with neurodivergent children. So I could go on about that, but I think it's incredibly important, mainly for attendance and behavior at the moment. What we're looking at, but I've seen it internationally and do present there internationally, is attendance and behavior. And emotional based school avoidance, or EBSA, is something I've been interested in for many, many years. Without it, children have to, are missing from school, and the teacher has to find a reason for it, goes to the doctor. The doctor doesn't understand hypermobility, but might say, oh, they're autistic or ADHD, therefore they're anxious about school environment. So they put it down to emotional based school avoidance. So, and what happens then is the child will feel I'm in too much trouble. I don't belong here. I'm not valued. So this is about the language, and neurodiversity is about all brains in the world being different. That's it. There's no one type of brain unless you're a clone. But the neurodiversity paradigm is about all brains in the world having value. Some have strengths, some have weaknesses, but they should all be valued. And there's no such thing as a normal brain. And neurodiversity, all being different, is like biodiversity, like that bark of the tree. There were a whole range of plants there. That's healthy for the world and the environment, like neurodiversity is. This is a strength iceberg. I've been doing icebergs for many, many years. So it's not about the visible and invisible, but the strengths and challenges. And I see both as a spectrum, actually. I say it's quite wide, it is. And we also flare. We can have different flare severity at different times and when we need more support. So y- for me, I've got a busy brain. When it's not good for me to have a flat brain. I don't feel too good. So, uh, but that happens because we often get ill. And so I think I'm not a neuroscientist or medical person, but the brain is a muscle and needs to work. And so when I go back to that cognitive word, that I didn't know how to write a sentence, let alone structure a paragraph, I needed health literacy to understand that. And that's what we need to make sure that we get the diagnosis, we get the support and help. And particularly in neurodivergent people, because sometimes we can be perhaps a little rigid or tunnel vision about certain things. So we have to keep an open mind, and that's where the health literacy and also health data comes in, because that's the basis of equity, with a few other things which I can talk about. Because without this, you have patterns of unmet need, yes, and systemic neglect. And we need to transform the landscape, transformational organizational change. Hence my master's, which I didn't realize would be so useful, as I said. So this is my quote, but we don't want to have a cure. We would like support for children with learning or intellectual disabilities who are also autistic, of course, but we need to look at the physical health for that. We do want adjustment, support, and management to understand our complex needs physically and how that relates to relational safety. Um, we are all human, and inclusion begins and ends with humanity and not privilege. So, if it benefits us, it's got to benefit everybody. That goes with it, and absolutely connecting is key. So, on that note, I would like to thank you all and the EDS Society. Thank you.